Tonight we're going to be focusing, as you know, on ageing with a particular focus on the area of dementia. And I'm Mandy Fader. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Health Sciences. And across the university, we're one of several faculties who have a strong research theme into this area of dementia. Our research extends across medicine, life sciences, biophysical sciences, psychology, social and human sciences. So we have a very strong area of research and interest into dementia, which is, of course, one of the most important key challenges of our age and how we're going to tackle this problem. We know that around 48 million people have dementia across the world, and that this number is likely to increase to something around 76 million by the year 2030. And of course, even in the UK, there are nearly 1 million people who have dementia, and so most of us will have our lives personally touched by dementia in some way or another, as well as in our professional lives. So it's a hugely important area, and what I'm delighted to see in this group of lectures that we have today is the breadth of which we're covering, right from the pathology and finding out about why people get dementia, right through to what it's like to care for people with dementia. What are those key challenges, and how can we possibly rise to that in the modern day? So our first keynote is delivered by Professor James Nicoll. James was appointed the Chair of Neuropathology in 2001 in Southampton. He trained in Bristol, Cardiff and Oxford University, and he has a shared responsibility for the clinical diagnostic neuropathology service across the Wessex region. His research interests are neuroinflammation, neurodegeneration and cerebrovascular disease, and he and his colleagues were the first in the world to describe and characterise the effects on the brain of immunisation against A-beta, which is being used as a potential therapy in Alzheimer's disease, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about that in a minute. So please could we welcome James to the podium to talk about dementia, what goes wrong with the brain.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I might have said what goes wrong in the brain and how might we fix it. So just make sure I've got the right slide. Yes, here we go. So the human brain is a wonderful thing. It's said to be the most complex structure in the known universe. And of course, our own brains are very important to us as individuals. So this is the lifespan of the human brain in fruit and vegetables. So spring, time of development and learning, midlife, our brains are functioning well with a bit of luck, and then the onset of winter and the challenges of the aging process. So life expectancy is increasing very rapidly. So this is life expectancy in developed countries from the 1840s to the present day. Life expectancy is increasing at a rate of 3 months a year, every year since 1840. And more people are living to these ages, 80 plus, at which dementia is a major problem. So dementia is a clinical term, or a functional definition, really, as is stated here. But in terms of what's going on in the brain, it's really damage to the information processing component of the brain. So the neurons, the nerve cells and the connections, the synapses, that are what's damaged. And particularly the important is the damage is widespread throughout the brain, particularly in the cerebral cortex, which is the area of the brain which performs the higher brain functions. So dementia is not simply an inevitable consequence of the aging process. It's due to specific disease processes, the commonest being Alzheimer's disease, dementia with Lewy bodies, and cerebrovascular disease is also important. So here are some facts and figures about Alzheimer's disease. The numbers are quite impressive. What I do when I'm teaching the students is I ask them to put their hands up if they know somebody, if a family member has dementia or a friend of the family. About half of them put up their hands, and they look around, and I think they're quite impressed that this is really quite a big problem, and one which needs to be tackled. So what do you see in the brain of somebody with Alzheimer's disease? Well, if you look at the brain with the naked eye, you can see brain atrophy. This is shrinkage of the brain compared to somebody the same age without Alzheimer's disease, so loss of brain substance. You really have to look under the microscope to identify the specific features that define Alzheimer's disease. And you can see abnormal accumulation of two different proteins in the brain, amyloid beta protein, A-beta, and tau. So A-beta peppers the cerebral cortex with these deposits. Cortex is here, and also accumulates in the walls of blood vessels in the brain. Tau accumulates inside the nerve cells, forms tangles, and also it's present in the processes of the nerve cells. There's also associated inflammation in the brain and dysfunction and loss of the synapses and the neurons. So the last 25 years, the main idea about what's causing Alzheimer's disease is so-called amyloid cascade hypothesis. And this is the idea that it's the accumulation of A-beta in the brain that is the initiating event in Alzheimer's disease. So this is A-beta molecule is produced and starts to clump together, a few molecules at first, and these large clumps, which are the plaques that you can see under the microscope. And this aggregating protein damages the neurons, probably by several different pathways or mechanisms, directly by interfering with control of blood flow and by provoking inflammation in the brain. So it's exploring this idea that the amyloid beta is the problem in Alzheimer's disease. Dale Schenk and colleagues at Elan Pharmaceuticals in California were exploring these ideas in a mouse model. These are mice who accumulate Alzheimer-like plaques as they age. What they found was if they immunized the mice against the A-beta protein at an early stage in life, they could completely prevent the formation of the plaques as the mice age. They also found that if they immunized the mice at a later stage in life, when they had a brain full of plaques, there was some reduction in the plaques in the brain. So, of course, the interesting question is, well, what happens if you do that to humans? In mice, it was associated with the removal of plaques and some benefit in terms of brain function for the mice. So the pharmaceutical company that they were working for, Elan Pharmaceuticals, set up this clinical trial. So this was the first clinical trial of this idea of A-beta immunization for Alzheimer's disease. So it started in the year 2000, involved 80 patients with mild to moderate Alzheimer's disease, enrolled in these 4 centres across the south of the UK. 64 patients had the vaccine, 16 the placebo as control, and they had a number of doses over 18 months. So this study was really designed as a study simply to see if it was safe to do this, and to see if the patients developed an appropriate immune response, developed antibodies to the vaccine. And in the years since then, we've been performing a long-term follow-up of the patients who were in that study. And this is really the reason that prompted us to follow these patients very carefully. One of the patients at a fairly early stage died, and we had the opportunity to be able to examine the brain, and the findings seemed quite remarkable. So on the left here is the cortex of somebody with Alzheimer's disease untreated, and you can see the brown dots of the plaques in the cortex, whereas the person who'd been vaccinated seemed to have far fewer of the plaques in the brain. So we were quite excited by this, very much intrigued, and felt that we should follow up the patients who were in the study very carefully. So we recontacted the patients and invited them to be followed up from a clinical point of view, and also gave them the opportunity to donate their brains when the time came. And so this is some quantification of the amount of A-beta in the brain in the patients who had the vaccine and patients with Alzheimer's disease untreated. And you can see there's a significant decrease in the amount of A-beta in the brain prompted by the vaccine. So these are sections, these are tissue sections of brain cut in this plane. This is a hemisphere, half of the brain, stained to show the A-beta plaques at this sort of low power scale. And so this black line is showing where all the plaques are in this patient with Alzheimer's disease who had the placebo, the control treatment. This is one of the patients who had the vaccine, and you can see there's quite a difference, nearly complete removal of plaques from the brain in this patient. Some of the patients who were vaccinated had similar appearance to the untreated patient here, no evidence of plaque removal. Others had small patches of removal of plaques from the brain. And some of the patients didn't actually had Alzheimer's disease once we had a chance to look at the brains under the microscope. So this is some quantification of all 22 of the cases we've now been able to assess in this way to date. So there's some colour coding here. So this is the density of the A-beta plaques. So blue is none, green is sparse, yellow is moderate, red is frequent. So this is the patient with Alzheimer's disease who had the placebo, and you can see mostly red and yellow, so a lot of plaques in the brain here. These are 5 patients who had the vaccine and had nearly complete removal. So they're all blues and greens, and other patients who were treated had varying amounts of plaque removal. So evidence that, as in the animal studies, that if you vaccinate against A-beta in Alzheimer's disease, you can provoke removal of plaques. But there are 2 proteins that accumulate in the brain in Alzheimer's disease, the A-beta and the tau. Does anything happen to the tau in the brain when you immunise against A-beta? So this is a set of images to try and address that question. So here's the area of brain of a patient where there are plaques remaining. This is the patient who's been immunised and the area of the brain where plaques have been removed. And these corresponding images are stained to show the tau. So I see this as a bit like a spot the difference competition. Is there any difference between these 2 images? And I hope you'll agree that the difference is that these tau containing processes associated with the plaques here have gone. Plaques have gone, and these clusters of the tau pathology have gone. So this is some quantification to support that. So you immunise, you reduce the amount of A-beta, and to some extent you reduce the amount of tau in the brain as well. So I'm a neuropathologist. I look at the brain and assess the pathology, and to me that's good enough. You know, that's what the vaccine did in the mice. It removed plaques. It's done the same thing in humans. It's also reduced the amount of tau by a bit. But what I find when I talk to people about these studies is most people ask me, well, but did it do the patients any good? Did they benefit from this at all? And that's where it's a bit disappointing. This is follow-up of all 80 patients who were in that study. At this stage, this was 6 years after the trial. And in terms of survival time and time to the development of severe dementia, there's no clear difference between the treatment group and the placebo group. Now you could say, well, it's only 80 patients in this study. It's a small study. It was never designed in a statistical point of view to be able to tell if there was an effect of the treatment. You could say we now know that about a fifth or a quarter of the patients here probably actually didn't have Alzheimer's disease. But the strength of this study is that it's a clinico-pathological study. So we know about the dementia status of the patients here, and we also know about the neuropathology. So, for example, what about these 5 patients who we know had Alzheimer's disease? They had nearly complete removal of plaques from the brain. Their brains looked like this after the vaccine. Well, unfortunately, all 5 of those patients with very extensive removal of plaques all progressed to the stage of severe dementia. So disappointing finding in terms of brain function there. The treatment seemed to be associated with some side effects, which in fact halted further development of this particular vaccine. A small proportion of the patients declined relatively rapidly. New abnormalities were seen on brain scans, and what we found is that this seemed to be associated with, although the plaques were being removed, more of the A-beta was appearing in the walls of blood vessels and causing side effects. And this is just some numbers to that. So as the plaques are removed after immunisation, there's an increase in the amount of A-beta in the walls of blood vessels. So you can see plaques here being removed and the A-beta protein appearing in the walls of blood vessels. So sort of side effects seem to be associated with the accumulation of protein in the blood vessels as it's leaving the brain. So some conclusions relating to the vaccine study here. So patients with Alzheimer's disease who've been actively immunised against A-beta can remain virtually plaque-free for up to 14 years. So the last 2 of the 5 patients I showed you who had very extensive clearance of plaques from the brain, they had survived 14 years after they'd been vaccinated, and they still had pretty much no plaques remaining in their brain. So very long-term effects of the vaccine. Inclusion of patients with other causes for dementia in trials of therapy for Alzheimer's disease is a problem. Obviously, you need to be able to get the diagnosis correct during life, and in the last few years there's been quite a lot of progress in that regard. So associated with removal of plaques, there's a relative reduction in the tau protein as well, but there are some side effects which seem to be vascular complications. This is sort of our main conclusion, as it were. Removing the plaques in Alzheimer's disease is not sufficient to halt the cognitive decline. And this is possibly because there's still some tau accumulation continuing in the brain. Although there's some reduction in the amount when you look in particular places in the brain, it seems that the tau is still spreading around the brain, and this may be why the disease is progressing. So perhaps it's too late. Perhaps you have to immunise before there's significant tau accumulation in the brain. So to me, I think this is the most interesting, outstanding question in this particular field. What would happen if you immunise somebody before there was A-beta accumulation in the brain, before there was tau accumulation? Could you stop these things happening, and could you stop the progression of dementia? So current status of the studies of vaccine for Alzheimer's disease, a lot of different approaches being used. There are of the order of 40 different clinical trials being taking place around the world, involving very large numbers of patients. Huge cost associated with these sorts of studies, but for the pharmaceutical company that comes up with goods, the potential financial rewards are enormous. There have been some large phase 3 trials have been completed, and I think it's fair to say the overall conclusion from those is there's not a clear benefit to cognitive function. But now the emphasis is very much on treating at a very earliest stage of the disease, perhaps even using this approach as prevention for Alzheimer's disease. And there's some evidence now that if you intervene very early, there may be some benefit to function. So I just want to mention a few words about inflammation in Alzheimer's disease as well, which is important to us in Southampton. It's a major area of our research studies, and the genetic studies tell us that inflammation is an important process in causing Alzheimer's disease. And the mediators of inflammation in the brain are cells called microglia. We can see that they cluster around the amyloid plaques, but they seem not to be able to dispose of them. And the microglia are responding to damage to the neurons, but they're also probably contributing to the neuronal damage. And certainly some of the in vivo studies in live patients, where you can do brain scans to look at the inflammation in the brain, suggest that progression of inflammation is important in terms of causing the decline in cognitive function. There have been some studies of anti-inflammatory treatments in Alzheimer's disease, but I think it's fair to say that to date they've not been really shown to show conclusive benefit. So we're very much interested in this area of inflammation in the brain. We've been studying the microglia, the inflammatory cells in the brain, very closely. And the microglia perform many different functions in the brain. And we've been trying to get a handle on exactly which functions the microglia are performing in Alzheimer's disease by picking out particular proteins which are each associated with different functions and trying to quantify them and correlate them with cognitive function. We've been doing this in a large group of post-mortem cases, nearly 300 cases from the CFAS study, with some interesting findings. It seems that the microglia respond differently to the presence of A-beta and tau in the brain in subjects who have dementia and subjects who don't have dementia. So this may be important in contributing to the progression to dementia. We found that this protein, IBA1, which is involved in microglial motility, movement of the microglial cells, seems to be associated particularly with good cognition, and there's less of it present in patients with poor cognitive function. So there may be some protective function of the microglia in terms of their motility. A couple of clinical studies I just want to mention. This is looking at the idea that systemic inflammation, so that's inflammation outside the brain, can contribute to dementia. So this is, for example, patients with Alzheimer's disease who have a respiratory or a urinary tract infection, and it seems that they do worse in terms of more rapid progression of cognitive decline than people who don't have infections. And that if you tie this together with looking at inflammatory substances in the blood, specifically TNF-alpha, then the combination of having a peripheral systemic infection and high level in the blood of TNF-alpha, rate of decline in cognitive function seems to be particularly rapid. So this has led to the idea of, well, perhaps you could influence the inflammatory processes specifically related to TNF-alpha. So this is an early clinical trial of etanercept, which is a TNF-alpha inhibitor that's already used for treatment of arthritis. This is a small preliminary study of just 40 patients to see if it's safe to give, and that seems to be not a problem. And this is looking at cognitive function in those patients, and there's just a suggestion that the patients who are receiving etanercept are doing better in cognitive function than those not. So encouraging first look at that possible treatment, and there are some further large trials now underway. So these are just some of the many people who've been involved in some of these studies, both in Southampton and our collaborators elsewhere. So I just want to highlight two people in particular. This is Clive Holmes, who's our Professor of Biological Psychiatry, who's been responsible for the clinical aspects of these studies. This is Delphine Bosch, who's an Associate Professor of Clinical Neuroscience. She's been responsible for much of the sort of scientific rigour of these studies. And many of the names here are students, PhD students and undergraduate students who've done projects with us and been able to contribute to these studies. So funding, Alzheimer's research, and UK and MRC have contributed funding towards the immunotherapy studies, and Alzheimer's Society to the etanercept study in particular. So I just leave you with names of some of the other dementia researchers in Southampton and some of the approaches that they're interested in. Okay, there we are. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, James. We're going to have a panel later, so we'll be able to ask lots of questions. It's a great start to understand, for those of us who feel this is not their speciality, exactly where the science is going in this area. Our next speaker, who I'd like to welcome, is Dr. Doug Brown, who is the Director of Research and Development at the Alzheimer's Society. Doug did his PhD at Cambridge on HIV research and has spent several years working for the MS Society, leading the biomedical research programme there. He joined the Alzheimer's Society to lead the research and development programme for them, and the aim there is to increase investment in research as a key goal, aiming to invest more than £150 million in Alzheimer's research over the next decade. Doug's also been part of a founding partner with UK Dementia Research Institute. The Society's research programme will provide a vehicle for funding research into cause, care and cure and prevention of dementia. And Doug is going to deliver his keynote on the Dementia Challenge, Care Today, Cure Tomorrow. So welcome to Doug. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. Thank you, James, for doing all the really complicated stuff, so it makes my talk much easier. I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so just giving you an overview of the challenges that we have in dementia at the moment, an update on some of the progress that's been made, but also focus in on the work the Alzheimer Society is doing itself and through other partner organisations to try and overcome some of these challenges. But before I go into my talk, I just wanted to say that it is a real pleasure to be here and be invited by the University of Southampton. So thank you very much for the invitation. We do fund, and I'll refer to it as I go through my talk, a significant amount of dementia research at University of Southampton. And we're very grateful to many people, some in particular at the university, to help us in all aspects of our research programme, from setting strategy to making funding decisions and sitting on various panels for us. And I just wanted to make a special recognition to both of my colleagues on the panel today who have been supporting the Alzheimer Society for a number of years, but also Professor Clive Holmes, who was just cited in the previous talk, Roy Weller and Amrit Mudher, who have done a huge amount of work for us at the Society, giving up their time for free to support our programme. And a special thanks to Professor Hugh Perry as well, who in general has provided a huge amount of leadership for neurodegenerative research, but also dementia research in the last few years in his position as chair of the neuroscience panel at the Medical Research Council. And I think it's fair to say we wouldn't be where we are today with dementia research if it wasn't for Hugh and his role at the Medical Research Council. So a lot the University of Southampton has to be proud of, and it's a real pleasure to be working with you. So back to my talk, and as I say, I'm going to present some of the challenges, and really the overriding challenge of dementia is that there's significant human and economic cost to the condition. We know that there are around 850,000 people with dementia in the UK today, and we know that number is increasing significantly over the next few years and decades if we're not able to develop new treatments or ways of preventing dementia. That's because we are all getting older and living longer, but by 2025 we could have more than 1 million people with dementia, and by 2050 we could have more than 2 million people with dementia in the UK. So real staggering and sobering numbers from the human perspective. But looking at the economic cost, a study that we published a couple of years ago showed that dementia costs the economy today £26.3 billion per year, which is a staggering amount of money. And if you compare that to other health conditions, that's twice the cost of cancer, 3 times that of heart disease, and 4 times that of stroke. So some real sobering figures just to help us at the Society in particular, remind us why we are here and the challenge that we have in front of us to overcome. We also know at the individual level there are a number of other challenges that we have to work towards overcoming. We know that for people over the age 55, dementia is the most feared health condition. From a carer perspective, there's huge carer burden here in the UK and other countries as well, but in the UK, over 50,000 people leave paid employment every year to become primary carers of somebody with dementia. We know that loneliness is a real issue, people with dementia, but also their carers. And we know communities are just not set up at this point in time in the right way to be supporting people affected by dementia, to allow them to live in their communities for as long as they would like. We know there are difficulties in different care settings, so looking at hospitals, looking at the community, looking at care homes and other settings, there are some difficulties that we have to overcome, and we've published some reports in that space. And from a treatment perspective, as you just heard from James, we haven't had any new treatments for dementia in over a decade. There are some treatments, but they're only symptomatic. So for those that they do work for, they are a lifeline, but they only treat the symptoms. They don't get to the underlying disease pathology, and they don't slow or stop that disease progression. So some real challenges that we have to overcome across a sort of broad area of issues. And coming back to the costs, as I said, this is twice the cost of cancer per year. If we compare that to the amount spent on research, we see about 1/8 the amount invested in dementia research compared to cancer research. Now, us, other charities and the government have been increasing our spending on research, so we're starting to bridge that gap a little bit, but there's still a way to go if we want to see the investment that dementia deserves for the research that's being done in the UK. But with challenges come opportunities, of course, and we understand a lot about these challenges. So us and others working very closely with people with dementia and carers, we understand them, we understand what we need to do, and we understand what people living with the condition want to happen in the short, medium and long term. And the Alzheimer Society is working incredibly hard, has been since 1979 when we were created, to try and overcome these. And we're taking a multi-pronged approach to addressing these challenges. And for us, this is a three-legged stool. We can't do just one of these. We need to be covering all of these areas, because by doing this, that's the only way we can overcome the challenges that people face with dementia. We are supporting people today. We are the largest support and research charity in the UK for dementia. We have 2,500 staff. We have 10,000 volunteers that work across England, Wales and Northern Ireland in particular. Most of those are providing care and support to people with dementia or their carers in the community. We're working hard to change society, societal attitudes. I'll come on to that in a bit more detail in a second. And of course, we are researching for the future as well, working as was mentioned earlier, working across cause, cure, but also care and prevention of dementia. So really taking an approach, multi-pronged approach, looking at the short, medium and long-term benefits for people affected by dementia. We work very closely with people affected by dementia. They inform everything we do. We would not exist without them, and we need them to tell us what we should be doing as their Alzheimer's Society. And where we can, we work in partnership. We know we can't do this alone. We have to be working with other charities, other organisations and the government to be able to deliver what we need to be delivering for people affected by the condition. So my next few slides, I'm going to talk very briefly about what we do support-wise, what we do around changing society, and then hone in on what we are currently doing, what we plan to do from a research perspective. So very briefly supporting today, we currently touch directly 100,000 people with dementia in the UK, which is a lot of people, but only about just over 10% of those who actually have the condition. So although we're out there providing that care and support, we need to see more happening. We're doing that through face-to-face direct support, but also supporting hundreds of thousands of others through our website, through our helpline, through our online tools like Talking Point, which is a peer support group. And we're working with universities across the UK to try and identify new ways of providing care and support to people in the community. Really unashamedly, we're nicking things from other countries as well. So meeting centres is one example of a programme that's been running for a number of years in the Netherlands, which is an innovative way of providing daycare. It looked quite good what they were doing over there, so we thought we'd take it, test it and evaluate it here in the UK, and we're in the process of evaluating that now. So doing what we can to try and fill some of the gaps that currently exist from a care and support perspective. From a changing society perspective, we know there's still a lot of stigma out there associated with dementia. We know that in the last 5 years we've come on leaps and bounds with addressing some of that stigma, but there is still a stigma. People do still feel it's a normal part of ageing, which it isn't, and are scared of it and don't understand enough about dementia. So we really have to be changing the societal attitudes and doing our best to enable people with dementia and their carers to live in their community of choice for as long as possible. We're likening this work to what's happened with the disability area. So real disability movement, completely changing societal attitudes that really came to a head with the Paralympics that were here in London in 2012. We want to see the same thing happen for dementia. So we're seeing ourselves at the Alzheimer Society as the rallying point. We can't do it, but we want to be the rallying point for a dementia movement across the country. And we have a number of vehicles that we've been using for a few years, and we're looking to scale these upwards to try and address that. We've got our Dementia Friends initiative, and some of you in the audience may be dementia friends. I see some nods, that's great. Well, you're in the 1.7 million people who are dementia friends in the UK. And for those of you that haven't heard about it, it's a fantastic initiative. It's a 1-hour session which increases awareness of dementia and gets people to make a commitment in their professional or personal lives to do something different that makes the world a better place for people with dementia. So we're using that to reach reach the millions across the country. We have dementia-friendly communities popping up across the UK, which are communities who are committing across businesses, local authorities, individuals to become a community that is better supporting people with dementia. And we also run a number of campaigns as well, which really highlight the injustice that people affected by dementia are facing at the moment in whatever setting, looking at hospitals, care homes, in the community, looking at dementia friendliness, really trying to highlight that so that people and society, general public, can get behind that injustice and campaign for that change going forwards. And then thirdly, we are researching for the future. And as I say, I'm going to sort of run through some of the research priorities we've got and some of the projects that we are funding. Now, I don't need to go through this in detail. James has done that very nicely for us. The key point here is that we are learning much more quickly now than we have ever done before about what is going on in the brains of people with dementia, with the various diseases that cause dementia. There is more research going on, still a long way to go, but we are understanding more and more about these two proteins, amyloid and tau, but the other mechanisms that appear to be important in dementia, which is really, really exciting and really builds that momentum behind dementia research. In a geeky kind of way, one of my favourite advancements in dementia research in recent years is the discovery that the changes in the brain happen 10 to 15 years before someone experiences, or could happen 10 to 15 years before someone experiences their first clinical symptom of Alzheimer's disease, which is fantastic because it really opens up a window for us, a window of opportunity to do more research and understand the very early stages of Alzheimer's disease. But potentially at some point in the future, it could be a window of opportunity for early intervention to try and prevent Alzheimer's disease from developing in the first place. So great discovery, but a lot we need to learn from that and take forward. And then what we do know, and there I know some people in the audience that are here from a public health perspective, we do know there are some things we can do in our everyday lives to reduce our risk of developing dementia. What's good for your heart is good for your head. So if we all did a bit more exercise, that would be good. If we all had a Mediterranean diet with the odd glass of red wine, that would be good as well. And if you believe the early research that was done in the lab, the odd glass of champagne as well may reduce your risk of dementia. It's not done a world of good for my food bill, but I'm sure my risk has reduced. Don't take that literally. That is very early research. Not quite sure they did it. They did it in mice and little champagne flutes, but we are learning more about what we can do from early through midlife to try and reduce our risk of developing dementia. And we can answer these questions through research. People are starting to understand that, and there's a huge momentum behind dementia research going forwards. So what are we doing? Well, first and foremost, we are increasing our investment in dementia research significantly. Go back 5-6 years, we were investing about £2 million per year in research, which is a lot of money, but it doesn't go very far when it comes to dementia research. But this year we will be investing over £10 million in research and development activity, which is fantastic. And that's great thanks to all of our supporters and donors at Society to make that possible. We've not stopped there. We said that we will invest at least 100 million over the next decade. This is a long-term game. We need to be providing that investment in the long term. And we have our strategy, which I've already mentioned, is across cause, cure, care and prevention of dementia. So really looking at the whole breadth of research that is relevant to people affected by the condition. And then recently, just in the last 6 months, we have committed an extra 50 million to the UK Dementia Research Institute that will be established. The government, from our campaign and lobbying and others for probably about 12 months, we were telling the government they need to make a huge, significant investment in dementia research. They did that by announcing £150 million for a research institute last November. And us and Alzheimer's Research UK have come on board with 50 million each to top that up and to be part of building the UK's first dementia research institute, which is really, really very exciting. So within our programme, across cause, cure, care and prevention, there are 3 key priorities that we're looking to address. The first one is we need to build research capacity in dementia research. From our research through around Europe, that we know there just are not enough dementia researchers here in the UK. For every dementia researcher, there are 5 working in cancer. So we need, again, to be bridging that gap. We know that there are some specialisms that are underrepresented in dementia, so we need to focus in on those. But we also know there's a retention issue. 70% of PhD students that are funded in dementia research aren't in dementia research after 4 years. So there's a lot we need to do to try and help with that career progression and keep people in dementia research. So that's the reason why we launched our Dementia Research Leaders Programme. Launched that a couple of years ago, supporting people from undergraduate bursaries through to PhDs, junior and senior fellowships, so looking at very early to mid-career stages. Well, I would say in a couple of years we have a very impressive portfolio of the types of researcher that we are funding, and we're doing more than just offering funding opportunities. We're offering the softer elements that are really, really important at providing training, networking and mentorship to early and mid-career researchers to enable them to become research leaders in their own right and build to create their own research groups in the future. And really the jewel in the crown of this programme is our network of 8 doctoral training centres across the UK, where we have invested, us and others have invested over £5 million in these doctoral training centres. It's brought over 50 new PhD students into the field, so the single biggest investment in dementia research capacity in the UK ever, which is fantastic. And we're delighted to be funding one of these doctoral training centres, co-led by Ruth Bartlett, the next speaker. It really is great because a lot of these doctoral training centres, including the one at Southampton, Alzheimer's Society provided some funding, but the universities were able to provide a level of match funding to fund even more PhDs or clinical fellows. And Ruth, I think, is going to be talking a little bit about the doctoral training centre, so I won't go into that in any detail, but it's one of our care ones, so we have 4 in care and 4 in biomedical research. It's really valuable research that could significantly improve the quality of life of people living with the condition today. Our second priority is speeding up treatment development, and this isn't us turning ourselves into a small pharmaceutical company or a biotech company. We don't have the budget to do that, and there are others, the companies can do that themselves. We're looking to take a unique approach to try and speed up the development of new treatments. So we're taking this repurposing approach that it's called, which is looking at existing treatments that are used for other conditions, testing them in labs, see if they work in laboratory models of dementia, and if they do, then we can go into clinical trials in people with dementia. And we've got some really impressive studies that we're funding here. The benefit of taking this approach is these drugs have been around for a long time. They're relatively cheap. We've got a lot of information about them and their side effects, so we can speed up that development of new treatments. If they work, we can speed it up significantly. A couple I want to mention. Liraglutide is a type 2 diabetes drug that we're trialling, we're a part funder of trialling in Alzheimer's disease. 250 people are being recruited to that across the UK as we speak. One of my team's favourites, and actually was the Daily Mail's favourite when we announced it, was a Viagra-like drug, tadalafil, for vascular. Apparently it's the new aspirin, it works for everything. So we're seeing if it works for vascular dementia, which will be fantastic. So funding it's only a small clinical study, a proof of concept study, but if it looks like there's something in it, then it'll be fantastic to take it to the next stage. And I won't go into any detail as James mentioned it, but we're proud funders, part funders of the etanercept study that's being done at the University of Southampton through Clive Holmes, which actually this is particularly pleasing because we were one of the funders of the early stage research that looked at the immune mechanisms and the potential importance of them in Alzheimer's disease, and to now be part funding this study, it's a really nice story. So we have our fingers crossed for this to be coming through to the later stages. And then our third priority is funding care research, which is a key part to our strategy, but not just funding care research, but getting the stuff that works into practice to the point where it's making a difference to the lives of people affected by dementia. We don't want to just be funding research and having research papers published. We want that research to be making a difference to people living with the condition today. And that is working with the researchers, but also working with the policymakers, the funders, the training organisations, people affected by dementia, bringing them all around the table early on in that research to make sure that can be rapidly implemented into practice. We're funding millions of pounds of research in this area, a number of projects at the University of Southampton, two mentioned here again. Ruth, I'm sure, is talking about the first one, so I won't go in that detail, but a fantastic project. And Clive Holmes is also conducting a research study into looking at how stress may contribute in dementia, particularly looking from the mild cognitive impairment, which is a kind of pre-stage to Alzheimer's disease, and the conversion of mild cognitive impairment into Alzheimer's disease. And if that proves successful, there may be some hints there as to what we should be doing in our midlife to try and reduce our risk of developing dementia. I mentioned it already, but a core part of our strategy will be working on the UK Dementia Research Institute. That'll be working with the Medical Research Council and Alzheimer's Research UK. This is a really exciting initiative. It's £250 million of new money coming into dementia research, which is really fantastic, and it will be funding research across biomedical, but also into care, technology and prevention. It will be launching in 2019 officially. We're on track for that, which is great, and we're doing a lot of work behind the scenes to try and identify a director, identify where the investments will be made. And the investments will be in a central hub. There will be a physical institute, but there will also be some centres across the UK carrying out research across the spectrum of its strategy. And for all the partners, it's absolutely key that we're working hard to make sure people affected by dementia are at the core of the Dementia Research Institute. We see real value in that in our programme, and the Dementia Research Institute will really benefit from that too, to make sure we're funding the right research at the right time and bringing that through as quickly as possible, so it will make a difference to people living with the condition today and in the future. And then just very briefly, I just wanted to acknowledge the unique external environment that we've been operating in for a number of years. We've had the benefit of David Cameron's Prime Minister's Challenge on dementia that started back in 2013. And that went from the UK to the G8, down to the G7, and then it went out through to World Health Organization, UN. We have a World Dementia Council, a huge amount of political and public interest in dementia, which is fantastic. Now, David Cameron obviously isn't Prime Minister anymore, but we are talking to Theresa May and saying this is a Prime Minister's challenge, not a David Cameron's challenge. So we're looking to continue that one. But actually, I mean, there's a huge amount of momentum. We don't want to be resting our laurels, but there's a huge amount of momentum behind it. And people are starting to realise what we all can do to make the world a better place. Medical Research Council and others, NIHR and others, are increasing their investment in dementia research, as Alzheimer's Society and other organisations as well. So real momentum. We've turned a corner with dementia, but we need to keep going in the right direction and at the right pace. So my last slide, World by 2025. It's a nice point to choose. It was a milestone that was set by the G7 that said there will be a cure, or in brackets, a disease-modifying therapy, which was, I think, a nice disclaimer, because how do you define cure for a condition as complex as dementia? But for us, we are cautiously optimistic about the future. As I said, there's a huge amount of momentum behind this. There is the political spotlight, there is the public awareness, the public interest. There's more investment going into dementia than ever before. And for us, this is and I don't think we're over-egging it when we say this, it's very similar to what we saw with cancer in the 60s, with HIV/AIDS in the 80s and 90s, and look where we came from, particularly a medical research perspective with those two conditions. We feel we're at that point with dementia, and if we keep that momentum going, we keep working with people affected by dementia, we keep working in partnership, and we all do our own little bits, personally and professionally, we feel we can create a completely different world for people with dementia and their carers in the future. So exciting times ahead, a lot of work that we still need to do, but thank you again to University of Southampton for playing your important part in that. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Doug. It's fantastic to hear all the work that's been going on, funded by your society and others. I'm going to waste no time because we need to move on to our panel soon. I'm particularly delighted to welcome our next speaker, who has been mentioned several times already. She's an associate professor in the Faculty of Health Sciences. So Dr. Ruth Bartlett is a mental health nurse by background and has qualifications in politics, cultural politics, social research methods, as well as being a mental health nurse. Ruth has really pioneered many innovative types of research methods that have been used in dementia research, and has been instrumental with a colleague in the University of British Columbia in bringing citizenship to the fore as a key way of perspective of looking at how we understand the lives of people with dementia. And Ruth will no doubt be telling us more about this in a minute. So I'd like to welcome Ruth Bartlett with No Limits, Improving the Healthcare of People with Dementia through Innovative Research Methods and Partnerships. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Mandy, and thank you, Doug and James, for your talks. And thank you very much for this opportunity. I feel very fortunate to be in a position to be sharing with you all the amazing work that's going on in the Faculty of Health Sciences, and many of the projects I'm going to be sharing with you. Some of the students are in the audience today, so I will be flagging up and highlighting many of the projects that we're all involved in, which are all focused very much on improving life and care for people with dementia, and also very much about, I think you'll see the potential application of our work for policy as well. So I hope by the end of this talk you'll have a much better sense of what we're doing within the Faculty of Health Sciences and the care research that we're involved in, and also you'll perhaps be inspired to connect with us and maybe get in touch afterwards with some of the researchers and some of the PhD students that you're going to hear about. But before I start my talk, I thought I'd just share with you a quote which is on the topic of no limits. I think it's perhaps quite a nice idea to think about no limits, certainly when in terms of when it comes to improving life and improving attitudes, and I think that's quite a nice idea. So I just wanted to share with you a quote. Which is, there are no limits to growth because there are no limits of human intelligence, imagination and wonder. And I really like this quote because it seems to me to kind of sum up what the sort of moral and strategic compass perhaps should be of all universities. It's certainly an idea that underpins the whole of the University of Southampton in terms of ambition and inspiring people and generating ideas. Any idea who said that? Einstein, good guess, but not correct. Any other ideas? No, another great guess. Would you like a clue? On the subject of world leaders, he was a world leader. And thinking about the topic we're looking at today.
Ronald Reagan?
Excellent. Yeah, top marks. It was indeed Ronald Reagan. Who, as you may be aware, he was obviously president and died in 2004 of Alzheimer's disease. And you may also remember his letter. He wrote a letter to America, the American citizens, being very open about his diagnosis. Do people remember this? And this is how he ended it. It was over 22 years ago, almost to the date, actually. And his letter ended, "I now begin the journey that will lead me into the sunset of my life. I know that for America, there will always be a bright dawn ahead." And thinking about the election tomorrow, let's hope he was right. And let's hope... The other reason I really like this quote is because it reminds us how important it is to listen to people with dementia. And I think that's really important for us all to do. And it's what certainly what all our students are educated and very keen and committed to doing. And so I think that's another reason why this is quite a nice quote. And yeah, let's hope for all our sakes there is a bright dawn ahead for America and the world. Okay, so moving on to the talk. Already introduced myself, already covered these points, but just to say there is a book if anyone is thinking about what to buy anyone for Christmas. I have written a book with Ruth Bartlett, myself and Deborah O'Connor, so that is available, and that was published in 2010. And basically in that book we were introducing a lens and a language of social citizenship. And this was back in 2010, and it's really refreshing and good to see that the language of rights-based discourse and the importance of improving care and the quality of life for people with dementia is not only a clinical priority, but it's also a social justice issue. And I think more and more that is on the national agenda, it's on the international agenda. So if you're interested in finding out more about what a citizenship lens means, then do look at that book. So my work has focused over the past 12 years on improving the lives of people with dementia, as it has for many other people in the faculty who I'll talk to you about and share their work shortly. But we've already heard how many people there are living in the world with dementia, and it's in the region of 47 to 48 million people. And our population, I think it's about 1.65 of the population have dementia, and that's slightly above the European average, apparently, according to Alzheimer's Europe. So the global perspective, if you like, I think is really important for us to consider. And just highlighting here some of the very latest reports which are out there for you to have a look at. The World Alzheimer's Report this year, they produce a report every year, but in 2016 it was very much focused on improving healthcare for people living with dementia. The briefing paper there, which is very much about living with long-term conditions. A really interesting fact in there is how 95% of people with dementia live with another long-term condition. So not only are they living and dealing with the symptoms and the problems and the challenges that dementia pose for people, but they're also perhaps living with diabetes, heart failure, stroke. So I think it's really important for us to think about the complexities, if you like, of people living with the condition, and we are doing that in the Faculty of Health Sciences, so I will tell you more about that shortly. The Dementia 2020 Citizens Engagement Programme, that's kind of hot off the press, and the Department of Health are very keen to engage with people newly diagnosed with dementia. So if anyone here in the audience, if you know anyone with dementia who's fairly recently diagnosed, then do look out for this toolkit. There's a survey in there, so they're surveying people. And again, it highlights, I think, how much we've moved on, I think, since certainly since Ronald Reagan was declaring his diagnosis, and certainly over the past sort of 10, 15 years, thinking about citizen engagement and how important that is. The Alzheimer's Society report, Opportunity for Change, is another critical piece of context, I think, for the work that we do, and certainly in terms of opportunities for people with dementia to get involved in research. And certainly James highlighted the numbers of people in the clinical trials that he's running, and also in this document just highlighting, though, how few people there are involved in research. So just 4% of people with dementia at the moment are getting involved in research, and I know government are very keen to increase that to nearer 10%, and there are various campaigns like Join Dementia Research to encourage people with dementia to get involved in research. So that's a kind of broader context, if you like, and many of these reports are underpinning much of the work that we're doing in the faculty. And this is one of our most photogenic buildings. The Faculty of Health Sciences has 2 buildings, and this is probably the most photogenic one, which is Florence Nightingale Building, Building 67. And we also have another building, 45. We like numbers at the University of Southampton. And this is where many of us are based, and others are based in the other building. So we're quite a large faculty, and there's quite a large team of us now working on ageing and dementia-related issues, and a growing cohort. So I'm going to be telling you more about the care research now that we are doing within the faculty to make life better for people with dementia and their carers. So at a glance, and just to highlight, I think that the main things that we are doing, we're strengthening capacity. So I'm going to be telling you about well, you've already heard about the amount of investment in actually funding careers and funding researchers. And so I'm going to be highlighting some of that work. And secondly, we're solving problems in areas of fundamental concern. I'm certainly going to be talking about the GPS project that I'm running, and also hopefully a couple of others if there's time. And thirdly, we're sharing ideas and building networks. So I think we're all very much committed to actually building our networks, and I'll be telling you more about the areas that we're doing that in shortly. So strengthening capacity. So we have 11 funded PhD students, all of whom are committed to improving life for people with dementia and their family carers. And also 5 of whom are on a clinical academic pathway. I think it's fair to say the Faculty of Health Sciences is leading the national agenda in terms of training and educating students to not only study for a PhD, but also to be working clinically. So they become clinical leaders, and they know then how to improve clinical practice in a very evidence-informed way. So we have five students focused very much on making a difference to care and clinical guidance. And I'll be telling you about 1 or 2 of those students as well shortly. And of course, they're supervised by scholars with an international reputation for innovative research involving people with dementia and their family carers. Most of the supervisors are based in the Faculty of Health Sciences, although we do have very close links with gerontology. So we also have supervisors in gerontology and also the National Centre for Research Methods to draw upon that methodological expertise that we have at the university as well. So, as you can perhaps begin to imagine, we're quite a lively and growing cohort of researchers, and we also, and very much this has been established through very generous investments from the Alzheimer Society, but also from the National Institute for Health Research Collaboration, which is connected to CLARC, Collaboration for Leadership in Applied Health Research, and Research Capacity and Dementia Care Programme. So I think those 2 sources of funding particularly have allowed us to really invest in people's work and to improve the way that people are researching and thinking about their methods. So we have a couple of photos there. That's 3 of the DTC students who were presenting their posters at the Alzheimer's Research Conference in Bristol. Yes, I went to another conference around the same time in Bath, so it was in Bristol last July, and yes, it was a really lively poster session, wasn't it? So a chance there for students to start presenting their work and talking about their work. And many people who attend that particular conference are people with dementia, family carers, network volunteers who were there. So it's a really good chance, I think, for people to connect. And then Naomi Gallant, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Naomi's doing shortly. So we're strengthening capacity, not only through investments, but also thinking about the environment in which we're providing to students. And as many of you will probably know, that all universities are assessed for their research quality on usually a sort of four-yearly basis. And we're very proud to have been assessed very highly, 4-star, for our research environment and quality for students. And that means that it's conducive to producing world-leading research that's in a very sort of vital and sustainable environment. So it's good that we had that approval, if you like, from our funders, but also one of our newest doctoral students, Susanna Nacho, has very kindly agreed for me to sort of share this quote, and just saying how she's just started out on her journey and was perhaps expecting to be working at home a bit more, but just finds the environment in which she's working is a very stimulating one, so is going to be based more in the faculty. So I think that these points are very important, not only for the quality of doctoral students' education, but also means that they then have the skills and can develop their qualities and abilities to then go out and connect with people with dementia and to do field work which is sensitive and ethically sound. So we're really pleased that Susanna and many of the other, if not all the DTC students and other doctoral students are within the on campus. So secondly, I mentioned that we are looking to solve problems in areas of fundamental concern. So that's another way in which we're certainly looking to improve quality of life and quality of care. And I've put these photos up of, you probably recognise these films, just to highlight really that they are so fundamental that even filmmakers are actually focusing and featuring the issues in them. So the film there on the right, does anyone recognise that one? Sorry? The one on the left, yes, is Still Alice. I'll mention that one in a moment. The one on the right, any guesses? No, that's actually Savages, which is a film featuring two siblings who have to finally get together and talk to each other because their father has dementia. So caring for a parent and what a common and perhaps fundamental area that can be. How many here in the audience are you either have experience or you're perhaps caring for a parent with dementia? Would you like to put your hand up? So yes, so a few people. It suggests that the Carers UK suggest, and Amelia Abbott, who's working in this area, as are other students, may be able to give you more details about this, but certainly Carers UK suggests that there's 6.5 million carers in the UK, 40% of whom will be looking after a parent. So Amelia is focusing very much on the experiences of caring for a parent and what carers are dealing with, and particularly their sort of understandings of how to take risk or how not to take risk. The other aspect, another project just wanted to focus on is about getting lost. And yes, indeed, that's Still Alice. And I don't know how many people have watched that, but I think it was a very popular film and watch. But there's a scene in that where Alice actually gets lost and uses a mobile phone to try and orientate herself and navigate herself. Well, it's estimated that about 40% of people with dementia will get lost. So it's a very common problem, and those of you who do care for someone with dementia, you may have experienced this issue yourself, and it's perhaps a very distressing one, and one in which you're perhaps not sure what to do the best thing about. And many people get lost repeatedly, so it won't just happen once, it'll happen 2, 3, 4 times. And so you can imagine how troubling that can be. And around 5,000 people, it's estimated, repeatedly get lost. And that's a very high risk factor for very expensive institutional care. So I think if we can find ways and do whatever we can to help people navigate, to help people with problems around getting lost, I think it's a really important thing to do. And so one of the projects that I'm running is about looking at how effective and useful GPS technologies are for helping people get out and about. And this is not the first project that's looking at GPS technologies. What we're doing is looking to build on the many, many pilot studies that have happened, and really looking to produce very practical guidance for people, for decision makers, for families, and people with dementia themselves to use to help them make decisions about what is the best kind of technology we might be able to use. And we're also looking to really influence and impact policy, particularly in the area of dementia-friendly communities, where I think you could probably see where that really perhaps resonates and could be quite influential. So at the moment, we're 12 months into a 28-month project. We've run focus groups with police officers who are are very much at the front line, if you like, of having to respond and deal to, certainly when people with dementia are going missing quite often. So police officers actually have quite a lot to say about that process. So we're talking to police officers, and we're also conducting walking interviews with people with dementia. So there's a number of researchers now who are realising how mobile methods like walking interviews can be a really helpful way to actually connect and engage with someone with dementia, rather than sitting down and perhaps talking in an office that you might not know where you are. Actually, walking and talking is quite a useful approach. So that's what we're doing as part of this study. And really pleased that we'll be not only taking very much a rights-based approach, but also the ethics of care, because as you can imagine, it's quite an ethically controversial topic. I think whenever you start talking about technologies and following people and that kind of thing, I know people can get very worried about that. So Tula Branley is the full-time research fellow on that project, and she's running that, and has expertise in ethics of care, and so that's certainly what we'll be looking to explore. And I should also mention that on that project we have a professor of law and also a professor in engineering, computer science engineering. So it's a very interdisciplinary study, because recognising it's a very interdisciplinary topic. If you want to find out more about the project, do contact us. There is a website as well, and you might well have seen some of the posters around. So do get in touch with us about that. Just to say a little bit more about the doctoral training centre students. There are 5 in total, as you've already heard, all of whom are researching an element of risk and risk-taking and enablement. It's very common for someone with dementia, once they have a diagnosis, for other people to wrap them in cotton wool and to perhaps be a bit overprotective and be very concerned about that person going out. So, for example, somebody might be locked indoors because they're very worried about that person going out. Or someone going into a care home, there might be certain objects that they're perhaps concerned about that person having. So one of the students is very much looking at the perspective of risk in that area. So this risk guidance is certainly informing a lot of that work. This was published in 2010. So I'm very much hoping that researchers, our DTC researchers, will be looking to influence and have an impact on future iterations of this area. And also the National Institute for Health and Social Care Excellence, they have some clinical guidance out on supporting people with dementia and their carers in health and social care. So again, it's a really key area, I think, care research, and actually thinking about what are we doing, what can we do to improve life and care for people with dementia. And also, what can we do to engage people with dementia in research? This is Naomi Gallant's photograph, actually, which she kindly shared with me. Naomi is a occupational therapist who's looking at meals and meal times and nutrition. And Naomi's one of a few of our students who are focusing in on nutrition, because, as you can imagine, that is another fundamental area of concern. Apparently, Alzheimer's Disease International produced a report on nutrition and dementia, and they found that up to 45% of people living with dementia experience clinically significant weight loss, which is shocking, isn't it? Can you imagine if that was the figure for children? I think it's shocking that someone with dementia should experience weight loss if it's not necessarily due to the disease, but because someone's food is out of reach, or someone is not attending to their nutritional needs. And we're very well aware that happens from the Francis report and other pieces of research. So Naomi is focused very much on that. I would urge you to check out her blog. Naomi's a very regular blogger. She's got a lovely website there. So if you're interested in nutrition, meals and meal times, do start by looking at Naomi's work. Sharing ideas and building networks is another really key area of our work and another way in which we're trying to improve care for people. So this is an image of when we launched the Doctoral Training Centre about 15 months ago now, a year ago now, and we invited members of the community in to come and hear each of the students talk about their work, and so that was a starting point, if you like, or a continuation of us sharing our ideas and building networks. So we're doing that locally, of course, within Southampton. It's really important for us as a university and as a faculty to be outward facing, to be connecting with clinical care providers, so the hospitals, as well as social care services, but also ordinary services that people use, like Southampton City Library. So we have a very strong link with one of the main librarians there, who's doing quite a lot of work around digital care, digital provision for older people. Housing charities we have connections with, and also quality improvement programmes in Wessex. Also very committed to public engagement activities. Again, this is Amelia Abbott, who is a dementia friend, I believe, and a very active member of Romsey Dementia Action group, and I know they had a Dem Fest in a few weeks ago. So that's some of the areas in which we're working on, and just to say, this is very important to us as well, actually connecting and talking to people with dementia, and involving people with dementia in our work and on our advisory groups. We certainly have a group of people with dementia who are advising us for the GP project. So I've been asked to stop, so I will do. I'll just take you through these final few slides. I must just mention the MSc Complex Care in Older People, which we're now offering, and I think it's a really fantastic programme for people throughout the world to be taking and looking at the complexities of care. And our vision is very much about securing more funding, influencing policy and research, and educating to improve attitudes. So just a final comment there. And must acknowledge, of course, funders, and also Professor Jackie Bridges, who's our excellent research lead for ageing and dementia, and a very big thank you to the students, and also just artwork credit there. So thank you very much for listening. Sorry I've overrun a little.
There's obviously far too much to talk about. I think that's the main problem. So I'd like to invite our speakers to come and join the panel, Ruth, Doug and James, and also to invite Mrs. Jan Gollop, who is a carer, or was a carer for her husband with Alzheimer's disease, and has played a really important part in the faculty, advising our research group on ageing and dementia, and also meeting up with our undergraduate students to talk about what it's like as experiencing life with someone who has dementia, and the kinds of issues that and the sort of the learning that needs to happen for student nurses. So thank you very much, Jan, for joining us. I'm sure there are plenty of questions. Well, already I've got some written down, but I'll go straight over there to that gentleman there. Could you just have a microphone, just say briefly who you are, and then your question to whom you're addressing it.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Tony Poole, and I'm a very long past graduate of the University, Southampton. I'm interested in the fundamental research, so I suppose this is one for Professor Nicoll. With the somewhat disappointing results of the amyloid beta injection program and so forth, a sort of does it work or doesn't it? Not quite sure. Has it been a possibility that you would consider, or that the amyloid beta and tau proteins, etc., are in fact a consequence of Alzheimer's disease, not a cause?
Well, that's a very good question, and we've been studying these proteins in the brain for 20, 30 years, and we still don't really understand exactly that question. I mean, the main reason for the idea that accumulation of A-beta is part of the cause of the disease is based on rare familial mutations that cause the disease. And we really don't understand whether that, although the common form of Alzheimer's disease looks similar down the microscope, we really don't understand whether it develops in the same way. And I think that's a crucial thing, is in a complex disease like this, we can identify many things happening in the brain. We don't know how they're interrelated. We don't know what's cause and what's effect. The only way to find out really is to intervene, change one of the things and see what happens to the other things and the overall progression in terms of decline in cognitive function. And so in a sense, the immunotherapy is addressing exactly that question. But the problem, of course, is it takes such a long time. I mean, the immunisation trial started more than 15 years ago, and we still don't know the answer to exactly that question yet. And it'll take us, as I mentioned, the idea is very much to move towards, can you prevent the disease rather than treat established disease? And those trials are underway, but it's going to take at least another 5 years or so before we know the answer to that. So you're talking about sort of 20 years just to answer the question that you've asked, basically.
Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, just to build really, that we don't want to get our hopes up too much, but there may be some treatments coming through that are targeting A-beta. Some major phase 3 clinical trials are reporting in the next few months and next year or so, and they could be the first disease-modifying treatment for Alzheimer's disease. We don't know until they report, of course, and if they do look successful, then it would be great, but they won't work for everybody, and there will be some side effects. There will be other things that we need to do. So there's some hope with those treatments, but as James mentioned in his talk earlier, the really good news is that all of the research isn't just focused on A-beta. There is research on tau, but there is research on other mechanisms as well. So we know a lot more about the brain, the difference. So looking at the neuroinflammation, looking at mitochondrial cells, lots of different approaches are being taken. So we are starting to see a bit of an explosion of the phase 2 mid-stage clinical trials. So the hope is, even though the timelines are sort of fairly long, the hope is some of those will come through, and then we'll see the larger scale clinical trials reporting in the next 5 years or so that will hopefully be identifying new treatments for Alzheimer's and other dementias.
Thank you. There's another question here.
Yeah, what do you think of Patrick Holford's thesis that some cases of Alzheimer's are related to inflammation due to high homocysteine levels as a result of lack of B6, B12 and folic acid?
Is that to James or
Is that for me?
Doug?
Yeah. Well, very interesting idea, and as I mentioned, there are many things happening and going wrong. The brain is complicated. There are many ways in which the function of the brain can be impaired, and we need to understand each of them and to understand what's cause and effect and what you can appropriately intervene with.
So there are many hypotheses, I
Yeah.
guess. So, just over there, please, and then I'll continue.
Southampton graduate and retired pathologist. For Professor Nicoll, could you elaborate a bit more on the methodology for quantifying the plaque deposits against a backdrop of brains with varying degrees of cerebral atrophy? I mean, was it sort of morphometric on the slides, or?
Yes, the method is in a histological section, staining with antibody, doing the immunohistochemistry to identify the protein, and then using capturing images using computerized image analysis to measure essentially area covered by the particular protein being investigated.
Area, but any correction for loss of brain tissue. I guess what I'm trying to say, and I'm sure this has been covered in your research, that X number of plaques in a shrunken brain would be sort of closer together, as it were.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, we haven't corrected for that. But I could say that the degree of atrophy in the groups that we've compared, the degree of atrophy is somewhat similar. So we've been comparing essentially end-stage Alzheimer's disease and matching for age, duration of dementia, ApoE genotype, and so on. So we've sort of tried to look at them in an uncorrected way. Yeah. So we haven't corrected for atrophy.
There's a question over here.
My name is Hazel Waters. And
Oh.
I'm a former graduate. Hello, Hazel Waters. I'm a former graduate of Southampton University, and I'm a carer for my husband who has Parkinson's disease and Parkinson's disease dementia. And this is a question directed really to Doug and to Ruth. I would like some advice from the panel on how to get a proposal that I have for an emergency domiciliary care service which is positioned midway between CareLink or Linkline, which will come and pick you up when you fall over, and the 999 emergency service. Because carers like me, you know, the standard pattern of care is that you have 4 visits a day, 2 carers, and then after that you're on your own. And at night, this is very, very frightening when you have a person who is completely immobile, weighs over 80 kilos, and evacuates his bowels into the pad that he's lying on. Now, what do you do? I got him up with all our equipment, cleaned him up and put him back to bed. It took 2 hours. I was exhausted. It was terrifying. And I think if there was some kind of service like that across the country, it wouldn't cost a lot to implement. It would make the lives of carers like me much easier. It would give you reassurance, and it might make it easier for people to say, well, I will keep my person at home because I will be able, I've got that as a fallback position. Now, this has been, I've presented this idea at Parkinson's Excellence Network conference. I've presented it, you know, we had sort of, Heidi Alexander when she was Shadow Health Minister, etc., district nurses. Everybody says what a good idea, but the people, I can't get hold of people in social services who will sort of commission this or think about getting it as a reality, and it would make so much difference, I think, to carers like myself. Sorry to have gone on.
No,
I thought this was a good forum to put that
I wanted Jan to comment on this. And
I spoke to you before, didn't I, before we came through? And there is something of a very similar nature that is in place already in Southampton. It's called the Emergency Care Package. And that is an excellent idea. What happens when my husband had really dementia at quite a severe level, they come, they take all the information as needed about me, about my husband, and what I would actually require in an emergency. And it does take some of the worry away. I never actually had to use them, but a friend of mine who was in the same position did. She became ill. She had to get an ambulance to be taken to hospital, but of course was worried about leaving her husband at home in a very distressed state. They promise that they will have somebody in your home within 20 minutes. It actually worked. It was fabulous. She had somebody in her home within 20 minutes. They stayed the entire night. They allow, I'm not sure exactly how long, I think it was 12 hours of care that hasn't got to be taken immediately. It can be taken a few hours, and then you've got time to get your family in place, to get whatever you need to do. And the 12 hours is over a period of a week. It is fabulous. It is exactly what you're saying should happen, and it does work. So that is an idea that's working in
So
Southampton.
presumably it isn't everywhere. That's the.
I only know about Southampton.
So the problem is around commissioning in a much wider way. I don't know if Doug would.
Yeah, no, it is, and I think you highlight a really important issue, and one thing I'd like to catch up with you afterwards, just to make sure you're linked in with Alzheimer's Society local staff as well. So I'll grab you later. But I think it's really important because your experiences inform what research can be done to identify ways of meeting those needs, and if there is a service, the important next step will be to evaluate that, look at the health economics, try and then disseminate that across the UK and get commissioners interested so that they know that not only is it meeting a need, but actually it's probably saving the money because the ambulance isn't coming out.
I'm sure some people in that circumstances would ring up 999.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard from ambulance workers who've had to go and do exactly that sort of clearing up. But
the one that's in Southampton is linked to a care company. I don't know whether it's not a private care company. It is linked to the NHS. But I don't know if it is a one-off or whether it is all over the country. I don't know the answer.
No, I mean, I think in the London boroughs you have CareLink, and you can sort of ring, you just press a thing on your, a pendant, and then they will come and pick you up when you've fallen. But it's not that, it's that midway, that kind of social, sort of personal care to clean somebody up, to put them back to bed or whatever, that is,
Thank you. I'd just like to ask a question which has been posed by someone from UCL who sent a question in, as we ask people to send some in for the panel. This is probably really for perhaps Ruth or Jan. Do we have evidence of the effects that maintaining and supporting family activities and routines within the space of the care home can have, what the effects are on the physical and mental well-being of a demented person? So I guess it's about changing the way that care homes operate. I suppose I was thinking more about sort of more dementia-friendly environment. What is the evidence around that, and do we know of good exemplars?
I think personally, my husband did what is absolutely fabulous with your research now. My husband had a tendency to get lost very often. At one stage, he went missing from a nursing home, and he was lost for 17 hours, which was absolutely appalling. That was a long story. But it meant that I tried very, very hard to get this GPS in place. I was told at that point that it infringed his civil liberties. Although he was able to agree, I was more than happy to agree, but we weren't allowed. That was just not allowed. But I think what happened then, he got taken to a secure unit. Now, my husband had no intention of ever getting lost. He wouldn't go out for the last 3 years of his life on his own. But the powers that be decided that because it cost so much money for them to actually find him, there was the army, police, all sorts of people involved in finding him. So it cost a lot of money, and when anything costs a lot of money, heads have got to roll. And it turned out to be mine, although he wasn't even in my house, he was in a nursing home. But I was then inundated with care workers. So many people came to my home. They decided that I should have sensors under my carpet, I should have, it was madness. But it ended up with him going into a secure unit. When he went into this secure unit, he was still relatively lucid. And the fact that most of the people there were so much further down the road than he was, it was very, very difficult for him as a dementia sufferer and me as his carer to watch him being almost imprisoned. It was a very, very difficult situation. He was still quite mobile, so I could take him out. But there was a lot of people there in similar positions. And although they were lovely, the home was lovely, the fact that he was imprisoned for no other reason than the fact that he had dementia was appalling. And I think the fact that the level of dementia is very hard to ascertain. They have mild, moderate, severe. How can you put it into 3 areas like this when, quite honestly, my husband would lurch from mild to severe in 5 minutes?
It'd be very variable.
It's very variable, and so it's very, very hard to answer that question because every minute of every day is different.
So I would like Ruth to comment on that, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, well, I guess a lot of research, care research, has been conducted in care homes. So that's probably where we've got quite a strong evidence base, certainly for the benefits of psychosocial interventions. So in terms of what works for people that's not a pharmaceutical or it's not a drug. So we know, for example, that perhaps music and singing interventions can be really helpful for people with dementia. We know about the importance of personalised care and the importance of individualised approaches, so they're really important. And we know from work that was conducted by Professor Tom Kitwood back in the early 1990s, Dementia Reconsidered, which was published in 1997, about the importance of the quality of care that's provided. So it might be that someone's behaviour, if you like, might fluctuate, not because of the dementia, but actually because of the way they're being treated. And that we know, we've known for a long time, haven't we, Doug? About the importance of seeing the person first, not the disease. And even though we know that, it's not always happens, does it? And it doesn't always, we don't always focus enough on the actual individual and the family member. We perhaps still pay a bit too much attention to the disease and put everything down to what's happening biologically and within the brain. Whereas we know very much about the importance of quality care is what can make a really big difference, and that's certainly what we're looking to focus on in our faculty.
It seems like the sort of society and sort of care models have not kept up with the pace of the numbers of people with dementia, and so things haven't changed sufficiently, perhaps in terms of law and citizenship and what we do in order to create any kind of a dementia-friendly society, let alone an environment, I would say. And I was going to ask Doug, please put your hand up if you want to ask more questions. You were talking about how, and I very much resonated with what I was thinking about where cancer was 20 years ago. And so learning the lessons from cancer and how what a highly stigmatised disease that was, how people wouldn't talk about it, people were pushed away, if you like, from a social perspective, and insufficient research funding was provided. It's transformed. So what could we learn from that experience that would feed in now to actually accelerate cancer dementia research?
And we do feel very strongly that we are at that cusp really for dementia, not just dementia research but dementia in general, and stigma is starting to be addressed when it comes to dementia. We still need to go a long way with it. I think what we've learned from cancer and what we learned from HIV AIDS is that there needs to be a political impetus. There needs to be the public awareness, but I think importantly people who are affected by the condition need to be absolutely empowered to drive what should be happening to make the world a better place for them. And when it comes to dementia, that's not just medical research, that is the care provision that's currently available or not available in different care settings, community, hospital and care home, but also to be asking for more investment in research. And Ruth, you mentioned it earlier on about joint dementia research, which is a really nice tool that us, Alzheimer's Research UK and the NIHR have developed, which is a way for the general public to sign up and say, I want to take part in dementia research. Now we have various targets. We've got about 25,000 people signed up at the moment. We refer to it as the dating service for dementia research, so it kind of matches general public, people with dementia, with researchers and helps recruitment to studies. So for us, that overcomes an important hurdle in research, but for us it's even more important because it does empower the general public and people affected by dementia, say, to put their hands up and say, I want to take part in dementia research. And we're already at the point where we have more volunteers than we have research going on in the UK. So for us, that's a really important message to charity funders, to government funders, is that we need more research. We have the volunteers who are willing to play their bit, biomedical research, but care research, prevention research. Actually, we all need to work incredibly hard to increase the amount of research that's done. So for us, learning from cancer is very much political public spotlight, but the empowerment of people affected by the condition.
Thank you.
Can
There's a
I-
question.
do you
Oh, sorry.
mind?
Go ahead.
I only wanted to add one thing. My husband had cancer as well, and the difference in the level of care between a cancer patient and a dementia patient was astounding. When you have cancer, you go in, you're immediately assigned a Macmillan nurse. She's with you all the way down the road. So if there's any problems, you've got a point of call. When you have dementia or Alzheimer's, unfortunately, that isn't in place. And I think with all the research, my husband would have been more than willing to join any way of finding out how to help, to become part of it. The unfortunate thing is you're diagnosed with Alzheimer's and then you're cast adrift. There is no point of call that you can find unless you're willing to go out and look. And the problem is you don't know where the hell to start looking. Cancer is out there. Everybody knows about it. Dementia is still so... the help you get is from your peers, from people in the same position. To pin a professional down is a very, very difficult thing. If you go to a GP, they haven't got the knowledge, no matter how willing they are, they haven't got the knowledge to help you. So you don't know where to go.
Doug wanted to come back just quickly.
Just very briefly, and picking up on your point earlier actually about the care provision hasn't sort of kept up with the times, and I think this is an exact example where there are people, so Alzheimer's Society, dementia advisors, support workers across the country, but not enough of them. We're only reaching 10% face-to-face. And I think it's because actually that model of care is not affordable for the number of people there are. So we have to rethink that whole process. So we are thinking about that at the Alzheimer's Society, working with researchers such as Ruth and others to try and find an affordable way of providing that face-to-face point of contact for everybody who receives a diagnosis of dementia.
We've got time for a couple more questions. I know Professor Jackie Bridges would like to ask a question just here, and then there's a couple more people, I think.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the speakers for their excellent presentations. Really, really helpful. And to Jan for agreeing to be on the panel this evening. I think at Southampton we are quite good at public engagement in the research that we do, so in shaping the research questions and also signing people up to take part in research studies, and for including people like Jan to advise on our research studies. But we know that there's more that could be done across the research community. To each of the panel, what single thing what single change do you think we could make to actually really improve public engagement in dementia research?
So we'll start with James.
Well, this is a very good example, hopefully.
That's my answer.
And we do have local events in Southampton to engage the public. So we have annual events where anybody's invited, and it's a way for opportunity for people in the community to get together with researchers who are doing the work and to interact and try and understand what's going on. But I'm sure we could do more.
Doug.
So apart from that answer, I would do more of what we're doing on this panel. Actually, I think as a research, as a university, I think you are one of the national leaders in engaging the general public and people affected by dementia. But maybe if you could have more of the people with dementia, current carers, former carers, going out on your behalf and doing that engagement, so supporting people. I mean, for me, it's all about that empowerment, and not only does that help the person, and I was at an event just earlier today, someone with dementia was saying that their life is transformed because of the opportunities that the Alzheimer's Society has given them to go out and talk about their condition. So if you can empower people with dementia and carers to go out and do that public engagement, I think that would be a very good thing.
Ruth, do you?
Well, I'd say we need to create as many different opportunities as possible for people to engage, because one size doesn't fit all. So it might suit some people to come in to the university and talk to us, but for other people they might not want to do that. So I think we need to create as many different opportunities as possible. Get off campus. I've co-authored with people with dementia, so engaged in a sort of an academic way with some people with dementia as well. And so it's about, you know, creating as many different diverse opportunities as possible. So even someone who's perhaps quite severely impaired, maybe in a care home, you know, it's perhaps not feasible or realistic to expect them to come and have meetings with us. I think we need to be developing and thinking about much more innovative and creative ways of actually talking and engaging with people in that kind of situation. So that would be...
Jan, I think you should have the last word.
I usually do.
There we go. Made it easy for you.
I think, quite honestly, the main thing is education and communication. I think it should start from schools. My grandchildren know far more about dementia than most, because they've had hands-on experience of Grandad. And this is happening over and over again with the people that are getting dementia being much, much younger. And I think there is nothing more frightening to a child than some old fellow coming up and saying, hello, which any guy with dementia will do, because they haven't got the filters that tell them that this is inappropriate. I think, as you're saying, there is not one size that fits all. But I know I've met hundreds of carers in the last 10 years, and there's not one single one that I could name that would not be willing to talk about their experiences, share them, and it needs to be across the board. It needs to be from education in schools. It needs to be like in my local village, where they have dementia champions. So it's in every shop. They're willing to take note of somebody. And I think once the education starts from the base of children, then it may take a few years, but life will change for people with dementia. And that's what's got to happen. It's got to happen because it's part of our life now. You know, it's a major part of life.
Well, I think that's a very good place to finish with those great suggestions. It's that time of the evening. I know there were many more questions, so please do, I hope that our speakers will be staying on to have some drinks and canapes with us. So I'd just like to invite you to join us afterwards and to give a very warm thank you to all our panel.